In this video, we're going to walk step by step through setting up your Castos account, creating your first podcast, publishing your first episode, and getting that podcast live in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, all in about 2 minutes. Let's dive in. Okay, here on Castos.com, we'll start our free 14-day trial by hitting the Get Started for Free button. Just need name, email address, and password, and say create my account. Here, we need to select the plan we want to use. You can see the description of the plans here. I'm going to select the Pro plan because we're going to use our Riverside integration and publish video podcasts as well as audio. And so you need to be on the Pro plan to publish video. On the welcome screen here, we have 3 choices. We can start a new podcast from scratch. We can import an existing podcast we might have with another provider, or we can connect to our WordPress site if you're going to be using WordPress and our Seriously Simple podcasting plugin to manage the kind of origin and publishing of your podcast. For this video, we're going to be publishing directly from Castos, so we'll say create a new podcast. Check out this video if you want to learn more about either importing or connecting from WordPress. Okay, first, let's give our podcast a title and a description. Next, we're going to create a podcast cover image or upload one if you have it already. If you have one already, you can just upload it and we have the dimensions that it needs to be here. If you don't already have one, you can use our entirely free tool called Dynamo to quickly design and create a podcast cover image for your show. And we'll do that now. So see, it already brought over the name and myself as the host of the show. I don't really like the purple, so I'm just going to adjust this a little bit. I like a gradient, but that one's too dark. I like this one. This one's pretty good with me. You can move all of this around, right, if you want. There's a ton of design options here. We have a whole video on using Dynamo to create awesome looking covers, and we'll link that in the description below. But for now, let's download this onto our computer, and we'll go back into the Castos dashboard and upload this. Okay, awesome. So we have our podcast cover now, which is awesome. This is the thumbnail, if you will, that will show up in all of the podcast directories. We want to create a website for our podcast, and we'll talk a lot about what a podcast website looks like once we get the podcast published. But for now, we just want to pick the subdomain or kind of the URL where this will be. So it'll be something.castos.com. If you want, you can assign your own domain. So if you have myawesomepodcast.com, you can point that, if you will, at the Castos web pages that we create entirely for free for you. Okay, so now that we've selected that, time to move on to picking the category. So these are just kind of where you want your show to appear in places like Apple Podcasts. I'm going to say that my show is about health and fitness, and you can adjust all of this later on. And now we're to the confirmation screen where we talk about what we've just done to create the podcast, and all of these things are editable later. Don't worry if some of them are off. But we'll say, great, I want to create my first podcast, and now it's time to add our first episode. And so I've recorded a podcast episode previously, so I'm not going to go into that right now. We have a lot of information on the channel about how to record and edit your episodes. Short version being, if you're doing remote interviews, I strongly suggest you use Riverside. We have a direct integration with Riverside to where you can publish right from your Riverside dashboard to Castos. You don't have to download and upload files. Since I've already produced an entire episode, I'm going to use that here. I just need to give the episode a title. If you've watched any of our other videos, you know that's the title I give to all of them. And you can see here that the description should be descriptive about what the episode is about, maybe a list of things that you talked about and links that you might have mentioned or people's social media handles that were discussed during the episode. Cool. So now that we have that done, we're going to upload the file that is on our computer. That is the finished edited episode that you want to go out. Okay, the file will upload here. It just takes a couple of seconds depending on how large the file is, and we get the green completed sign here. We see down below episode transcripts. This will be created automatically if you've opted into transcripts, and I'll show you in a minute where you can find that. Castos offers you the ability to transcribe every episode within all of the podcasts you have entirely for free. Please check that out. Transcripts are a great way to increase both discoverability of your show as well as accessibility for folks who are hearing impaired. Next, we have a little bit of meta information like keywords, season, and episode numbers. You can use these if you want, but they're not absolutely mandatory. as well as episode types. So you can see we can have a full or normal episode. We can have a trailer or a bonus. Again, pick these if you want. They're absolutely optional. If you're using a custom link for your website, you can enter that here. And lastly, if you have a custom image that's specific just for this episode, you can use it, but you don't have to. Again, these are all optional fields. The only thing we really need is a title, a description, and a file. And then we'll publish this. And we'll go ahead and publish this now. You can schedule it into the future if you'd like. Okay, so we've created our first podcast. We've published our first episode. Now let's check out our podcast website and let's publish this to podcasting directories like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So within our podcast here, let's go to the website area just to check out the options around a podcast website with Castos. So we have 3 themes built right into the platform. We call them Lagom, Orca, and Poa. And you can preview any or all of these here just by clicking these buttons, right? So you can preview these and pick the one that you want. I like this one best. And you can upload images and customize these a lot to fit kind of the brand and look and feel of your show. I encourage you to check this out. But for now, we're just going to go with kind of the stock website that we have here. And we've saved that. And now let's just click the Visit Podcast Website button to check out the free podcast website that we build for you. And you can see we have a description about the show here, the title. You can include links to your show on places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we'll do that in a minute. And then we have the first episode listed here, and you can click through and play this episode right in the browser if you'd like. So if you're wanting to share your podcast with your audience, this is the link that you would use to share it. Now, if you're like, hey, I already have a URL or a website domain for my show and I want to use that, you can absolutely do that. And you just come down here to the advanced options and enter the custom domain that you want to use, and we'll guide you through that process. Okay, so we made our first podcast. We published our first episode. We've checked out and configured our podcast website. Now it's time to get this thing live and onto places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And here is where Castos makes it super easy for you because we do all of this for you. You literally just have to click a button, and that is in the distribution area. Click directories and say, hey, can you please set this up for me? And the Castos team will submit your podcast on your behalf to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and about a dozen other places. And so say, hey, I want to start this process. I would like your help. We have checked everything off the box here because we have all of these things done, which are kind of the requisites for your show to be accepted in podcast directories like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And we'll say next and submit my podcast for me. So we've asked the Castos team to do this. Usually in about 24 hours, our team will take care of this for you, and it's all automatically done. You'll get an email confirmation once your show has been submitted and approved into all of these platforms so you can share your new podcast with the world. And that's it. From here, we can do a lot around monetization and private podcasting and explore a lot of the edges of podcasting. But at its core, this is what Castos does. And here in just a few minutes in real time, we've walked through every step of the process so you can go from, I just have an idea, I want to start a podcast, to that thing is live and out there in the world, and you can start growing your audience. If you'd like to check out Castos, head to castos.com to start your free 14-day trial. We'd love to help you on your podcasting journey, and we'll see you on the inside.